Today I'm going to demonstrate an experimental trick which allows you to defend your airspace against a player who outnumbers you in fighters. And I call this experimental because I just thought about this and I haven't tried it against a real player, so I don't know exactly how good this actually is. In this scenario, I'll be playing the defending red player, which has 5 fighters and a bomber, and I'm going to be attacked by the blue player, which has 10 fighters. The name of Fighter's Punch is because I'm going to attempt to use this bomber to absorb as many of the enemy shots, while my own fighters will be doing the damage. If I just fly my bomber along with my fighters, this thing will not work, as my bomber will be immediately targeted and die in the first engagement. So in order for this thing to work, I have to protect my bomber at all costs. And this implies landing the bomber and surrounding him with some types of buildings. In this case, I've chosen to put walls, but any other buildings can actually work. I've tried it with windmills and it is just as good. Here I have a waypoint that allows me to land this bomber exactly between these two walls. One thing to note is that you can actually place the walls after the bomber has landed, and you can actually place walls on top of the bomber itself. Now, even though you might think that this gives him additional protection, in reality it doesn't matter that much. Even if you're using T2 walls, the spaces between the pieces will eventually be enough for the fighters to land their shots. And since we're not concerned about having the bomber survive indefinitely, just being able to survive a few shots is just good enough. And I'm going to place the bomber a bit closer between these walls. Okay, now all I need is 5 fighters of my own. To patrol behind my bomber, and I'm going to use 10 fighters to attack this position. Now, before I do so, I have to mention that in this first example, I'll be leaving global vision on. So now the enemy fighters see everything just as we do. And this is because the simulation will happen very fast, and I'll take you step by step of what is about to happen, just so that you are prepared and watch for the details. So as soon as the fighters approach my bomber, once the bomber is in their line of sight, they will be funneled in, and the bomber will attract them as it is a magnet. All their initial first shots will probably land in this wall over here. After their initial shot, they have 0.9 seconds reload time, which will happen above this bomber. At the same time, my own fighters will intercept the enemy fighters, and some of them will actually exchange fire. After that, the enemy fighters will turn around and try to shoot at my bomber again. At this time, my own fighters will probably tailgate them, and this will repeat several times, and this will end with either my own fighters winning or the enemy fighters winning. If I'm very lucky, I'm going to win this fight with three of my fighters and my bomber alive. Let's see what actually happens. Okay, this was good enough. Now, I mentioned before the experiment that this is with global vision on. And this is actually a better scenario that would happen in real time in your real games, and that's because if you look at the fighters, they have 210 line of sight, which is the ground line of sight, and they have 950 air line of sight. When an airplane is landed, just as my bomber is here, it counts as a ground line of sight. And because the fighters have so poor line of sight regarding ground, when it actually happens in a real fight, they will not see the bomber in most of their cases. Even if I fly the fighters on top of the bomber, the front fighters will scout the bomber and only a few fighters in the back will actually shoot it. But by the time all the fighters have cleared the bomber, uh, the bomber will completely disappear from their line of sight. And from that point is just a dogfight between my fighters and the enemy fighters. And to see this in action, and while there is some RNG involved in this experiment, in most of the cases the blue player wins, which is kind of bad since we want to since we our own experiment of using a bomber didn't actually work in this case. But I have a fix for this solution, and I hopefully will be able to demonstrate on my first attempt. And this solution implies toggling between having the bomber on the ground and airborne. And there are a few ways to do this. One is to actually click the bomber somewhere near his own position, and you can see that he jumps a bit. But I've tried this and the bomber doesn't appear on the fighter's line of sight, so this thing doesn't work. But what actually works is uh, sending the bomber somewhere ahead, and once it is airborne I can actually cancel and it will drop back down. And if I time this perfectly, the fighters will see the bomber in the air, and before they uh, actually shoot their first shot, the bomber will be on the ground again and will be protected by walls. And once the fighters clear the bomber and they're turning again, I can actually put him airborne again so they can be aggroed, so the bomber can be aggroed again. Let me try this and see if I manage to do this in my first attempt. I have to land the bomber first. Okay, this should be good enough. Okay, let's see how this goes. So I managed to win the fight with 3 of my fighters still alive, and my bomber also survived, which is actually just as good as the first scenario. So I'm eager to try this against real players and see how well this actually performs.